The rain hadn't stopped for hours. It drizzled softly against the windshield of Ethan Brooks' aging sedan as he waited at the red light on a sleepy Chicago intersection. The clock on the dashboard read 7:38 in the morning. He tapped the steering wheel lightly, eyes flicking to the bundle of race flyers in the passenger seat. The Chicago Marathon, just months away. He had signed up. Finally, after years of hesitation, he was going to do it. Ethan was 26, lean from years of running the same neighborhood streets after his delivery shifts, and he lived simply one-bedroom apartment, second-hand clothes, shoes with worn soles, but enough determination to outlast them. Life had been steady, predictable, even, delivered by day, trained by night. He didn't have much, but what he had, he valued. His health, his rhythm, his freedom. The light turned green. Ethan eased off the brake and began to accelerate when a flash of metal and thunder slammed into the driver's side. Time cracked in half. There was no screech, no warning, just force. Violent, instant, unforgiving. His world twisted into a carousel of glass and steel, and then everything went dark. He woke to silence. White. That was all he could process at first. A ceiling, sterile and flat above him. The scent of antiseptic stung his nose. Machines beeped somewhere to his left. He tried to move. His fingers twitched. That was something. But when he willed his legs to shift, nothing happened. A heavy, unbearable stillness. Ethan? The voice was calm, professional, detached. A man in his 50s with steel gray hair and a sharp jaw stood at his bedside, clipboard in hand. I'm Dr. Marcus Hill. You were in a severe accident 2 days ago. A truck ran a red light and struck your vehicle at full speed. Ethan blinked slowly. His throat ached when he tried to speak. Dr. Hill continued, eyes scanning the medical chart. The impact caused a thoracic spinal cord injury. The damage is significant. I won't sugarcoat this. Ethan, you suffered a complete spinal cord injury at the T7 level. The words didn't land all at once. You will likely never walk again. That's when it hit, like a cold wind ripping through him. Like all the roads he had ever run suddenly collapsing into a dead end. Ethan stared at the man, searching for a crack in his certainty, a flicker of hope, something. But there was nothing, just the sound of machines and the hollow space opening inside him. The days that followed blurred into one another. Morphine haze, whispered conversations, the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Visitors came and went, co-workers, a neighbor, even a couple of old friends. But over time, the visits thinned. Messages stopped. Silence grew roots. And Ethan stopped trying to talk. He began counting ceiling tiles, listening to the rain outside, watching other patients with less severe injuries get wheeled out, homebound, mobile. Meanwhile, he remained, a body from the waist down that no longer obeyed, muscles wasted, skin pale, spirit cracked. Physical therapy began a week later. At first, it was only passive stretching, nurses moving his legs for him, rotating joints, massaging circulation. He hated every second, not because of the pain, but because it reminded him of what was gone. He stopped eating much, stopped answering when the therapist tried to cheer him up. He had once been a man of motion. Now, he was a man of silence. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was the slowness. Time crawled in that hospital. Seconds stretched. He'd stare at the walls for hours, wondering if this was it. If this bed would be the rest of his life. If the young man who once dreamed of marathons would now measure victories in inches and handrails. Months passed. Eventually, they moved him to a rehabilitation center. A new bed, new routine, more sterile smiles. He got used to the chair, the way people's eyes dropped to it, then flicked away. He hated the pity, hated the encouragement, too. They meant well, but no words could stitch what had torn. One night, alone in his room, Ethan rolled toward the mirror by the sink. He stared at his reflection for a long time. His face looked older, eyes sunken, cheeks pale. He reached for his leg with both hands and lifted it, just to feel the weight. It might as well have belonged to someone else. He whispered the words before he even knew what they meant. Maybe it's over. But as the thought settled, something stirred. Not defiance. Not yet. Just a question. What if it's not? That whisper returned days later, during another grueling session with Maya, his physical therapist. She was relentless in the best way, never patronizing, never letting him give up. That day, they worked on balance, sitting upright, core control. It was humiliating to sweat and shake just from sitting, but when he managed it, even for a few seconds, she smiled. Progress, she said, wiping his brow. He didn't believe her. Not yet. But that night, lying awake and watching the moonlight spill across the floor, Ethan thought about that word. Progress. It was small. It was fragile. But it wasn't nothing. And in that fragile space, something began to form. A question, again. Not loud, but steady. What if I could? What if I tried? He didn't know what trying meant yet. Didn't know where it would lead. But for the first time since the crash, Ethan Brooks felt something other than despair. He felt a flicker. He felt possible. The corridor outside the rehab center's physical therapy wing was usually quiet in the early evenings, but that night, voices cut through the silence. Ethan hadn't meant to overhear them. He had simply been wheeling himself back from a late session, frustrated after a poor attempt at parallel bars, when he paused near the admin desk to catch his breath. The air was heavy with disinfectant and the sterile weight of exhaustion. Then he heard a voice he recognized. Curt, measured, unmistakable. Dr. Marcus Hill. I've called everyone Meredith, he said, his voice low but urgent. Specialists in Boston, Houston, even one in Switzerland. They all say the same thing. The surgery needs to happen within 6 months or it's not viable. But it's $380,000 in insurance. He stopped, exhaled hard. They're covering almost nothing. The woman's voice on the other end, his wife, Ethan guessed, was muffled, but her tone cracked. There was a pause. Then Dr. Hill spoke again, this time quieter. I'm not asking for sympathy. I can't lose her. Ethan sat frozen, the wheels of his chair still. He waited until the doctor's footsteps faded, then turned and rolled slowly toward his room. The hallway seemed different now, heavier somehow. For months, he had remembered Dr. Hill only as the man who had delivered the sentence that shattered his life, the one who had stood beside his bed and told him he would never walk again, as if reading off a grocery list. Cold, clinical, unmoved. But hearing that raw edge in his voice, the voice of a father pleading, not a surgeon diagnosing, shifted something. Back in his room, Ethan stared at the ceiling, as he had done countless nights before. But this time, the silence didn't feel like defeat. It felt like a question. The image of a child he had never met began to form in his mind. Sophie, 10 years old. A name he had only just heard, but now it pulsed inside him like a drumbeat. A rare heart condition. Time running out. A man out of options. Ethan didn't sleep that night. His mind replayed every second of that phone call, every tremor in Dr. Hill's voice. For a long time, he hated the man, blamed him, resented how easily he had delivered that verdict, how distant he had seemed in the aftermath. But now, there was something else, a sliver of understanding. The man who had given him the worst news of his life was now on the edge of losing his daughter, and no one was stepping in to help. The next morning, Ethan sat staring at the blank screen of his laptop. His hands hovered over the keyboard, uncertain. He opened a search tab. Marathon fundraisers. He clicked through dozens of stories. Runners raising money for cancer research, rare diseases, lost homes, injured veterans. Some had raised thousands. Others more. His throat tightened. A marathon? It was a ridiculous thought. Insane even. He could barely make it from his bed to the therapy room without his arms shaking. But the thought clung to him. He wheeled back from the desk, opened the drawer of his bedside cabinet, and pulled out the crumpled flyer he had kept all this time, the one from before the accident, the Chicago Marathon. Bold letters, runners in mid-stride, the skyline behind them. October, 11 weeks away. Don't be stupid, he whispered to himself. But the words sounded weak. What if he didn't run it for himself? What if it wasn't about proving anything anymore? What if it was about Sophie? The plan that formed in his head wasn't clear, nor was it remotely realistic, but it was loud. Ethan knew he couldn't run in the conventional sense. He would need equipment, braces, maybe even assistance. He would have to start training in ways he had never imagined. But if he could get back on his feet, even with support, if he could take that first step again, and then another, could he finish 26 miles? Could he do the impossible? He pitched the idea to Maya that afternoon during therapy. At first, she laughed, not mockingly, but like someone who thought he was joking. A marathon? Ethan, you barely passed 5 minutes on elliptical hand crank yesterday. I'm not saying I'll sprint it, he replied. I'm saying I'll finish it. Her face changed. She stared at him for a long time. Then she set the weights down, crossed her arms. Why? He hesitated, unsure whether to tell her the whole truth. But something in her steadiness made him open up. Dr. Hill's daughter, Sophie, she needs surgery. It costs almost $400,000. He doesn't have it. I want to run for her. Maya blinked. For the first time since he had known her, she seemed at a loss. Then she slowly nodded. I'll help you, she said. But if we're doing this, you do exactly what I say. No skipping. No self-pity. You train like your life depends on it. It doesn't, Ethan replied. Hers does. The next day, they began. It started with upper body conditioning, arms, shoulders, core, then balance drills, then braces, custom-made leg supports that strapped around his knees and thighs, locking joints into position for assisted standing. The first time he stood, with Maya holding him upright, Ethan cried, not from pain, from a sensation of gravity pressing down on him like it hadn't in 2 years. They'd built a regimen, 3 sessions a day, strength, balance, coordination, walking with support, resistance bands, hydrotherapy. Every movement was deliberate, painful, draining. But Ethan didn't miss a single session. And when the pain made him want to quit, he thought of Sophie, of a little girl, somewhere counting days on a calendar she didn't understand, while doctors spoke in hushed tones around her. He created a page on a fundraising platform, uploading a short video with Maya's help. He spoke directly to the camera, voice steady, eyes clear. My name is Ethan Brooks. 2 years ago, I lost the ability to walk. I was told I'd never take another step. But today, I'm training for the Chicago Marathon. Not for me. For a 10-year-old girl named Sophie who needs a heart surgery her father can't afford. I don't have money. I don't have a miracle. But I have miles left in me. And I will run them for her. He posted the video. Within 24 hours, it had 10,000 views. Within 3 days, it passed 100,000. Donations began to pour in. Messages from strangers, veterans, single mothers, teachers, teenagers, all writing to say how his story moved them, inspired them, broke them open. Some gave $5. Some gave $50. One man from Texas donated $1,000 with the message, "For Sophie and for you, brother." Ethan didn't respond to any of them. He just trained. The momentum was growing, and he knew the day would come when Dr. Hill would see it, when he would learn what Ethan was doing. And when that day came, there would be no turning back. Because the moment the world started believing in his impossible promise, he would have no choice but to fulfill it. Not just for Sophie, but for the boy he used to be. The one who ran freely through Chicago streets and believed anything was possible. Even now, even this. The first time Ethan walked across the rehabilitation gym without falling, a quiet, stunned hush fell over the room. No one clapped. No one cheered. Even Maya stood silently, watching him take one stiff, trembling step after another across the padded floor. His legs were encased in mechanical braces, his knuckles white from gripping the parallel bars, and his breath came in short, controlled bursts. But he made it from one end to the other, without collapsing, without quitting. It had taken 6 weeks of brutal, unforgiving training, but there he stood, not as the man he used to be, but as the man he was determined to become. Outside the gym, life had shifted. The video he posted had ignited something no one, least of all Ethan, had predicted. National news outlets had picked up his story. Headlines appeared on social media. Paralyzed man trains for marathon to save surgeon's daughter. The irony wasn't lost on the public, and it fueled a narrative. the patient helping the doctor, the broken man walking again for someone else's life. Donations surpassed $50,000 within the second week. Comments flooded in from every direction. Ethan didn't read most of them. He couldn't. He had no emotional bandwidth to absorb the weight of that attention. His world had narrowed into three certainties: wake, train, survive. What changed everything wasn't donation or a headline, but a message left on his fundraiser page by a woman named Rachel Hill. She talks about you. Sophie, my niece. She says you're like a superhero. You've given her hope in a way none of us knew how to. Thank you. That message nearly broke him, because until that point, Sophie had only been an idea, a motivation, a cause. But now she had a voice. She had thoughts. She had feelings. She had attached her faith to him. And somehow, despite never meeting, she believed he could save her. He began training harder. Maya brought in specialized equipment, weighted vests, resistance bands, altitude masks. She coordinated with prosthetic engineers to fine-tune the braces for greater flexibility. Every session pushed Ethan past what felt tolerable. His arms ached from the crutches. His thighs burned from the force engagement. His shoulders, his spine, his lower back, all screamed with a pain that sometimes lingered for days. But there was no room for negotiation. He was racing against a calendar, against his own biology, against time itself. One afternoon, after collapsing halfway through a trial distance, Ethan lay on the floor, sweat dripping from his forehead, chest heaving. Maya kneeled beside him, not speaking at first. Then she said softly, "You know it's okay to cry, right?" He shook his head. "If I cry, I'll stop." "You don't have to be a machine to be a hero." He turned to her, jaw clenched. "I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm trying to keep a promise." She looked at him for a long moment and then stood, offering her hand. He took it. As his strength improved, so did his form. He learned to pace himself, to manage energy, to fall properly when his legs betrayed him. He wore pads under his clothes now to protect his knees and hips. Some days, he practiced outside on the running track behind the center, dragging his legs forward one step at a time, a physical metaphor for determination incarnate. Onlookers sometimes stopped to watch. Volunteers occasionally joined in, walking beside him. A local TV crew filmed one of his sessions and aired a segment that ended with the anchor in tears. One evening, as he rested in the courtyard, Ethan heard footsteps approach. When he looked up, the last person he expected stood there, Dr. Hill. He was dressed plainly, no lab coat, no clipboard, just a man. "I saw the video," the doctor said. His voice was softer than Ethan remembered. "And the page? I didn't know." Ethan said nothing. Dr. Hill stepped closer. "You shouldn't be doing this. You've done enough." "I haven't done anything yet," Ethan replied. "She still needs a surgery." The doctor looked away, jaw tight. "You don't owe her this." "I know. That's why it matters." They stood in silence. The sky above them was streaked with the last hues of twilight. For a long moment, neither moved. Finally, Dr. Hill nodded. "She asks about you every day now. We don't show her the comments, just the videos, just the parts where you keep going." Ethan nodded once, then looked down at his legs. "Then I'll keep going." After that visit, something changed in Dr. Hill. He didn't become warm, not exactly, but he became present. He visited more often, checked in after sessions, reviewed Ethan's vitals. And though he never said the words, Ethan could see it in his posture, the gratitude, the awe, the quiet transformation of a man witnessing redemption from an angle he never expected. By week 8, Ethan had covered 10 miles. Not in a row and not without help, but 10 miles nonetheless. It was a milestone that left him crying in the locker room, curled on a bench with Maya's hand on his back, both of them wordless. Because it wasn't just a number, it was proof. Proof that the impossible was shifting. That maybe, just maybe, 26 was no longer a fantasy. The night after the 10-mile mark, Ethan received a package. Inside was a hand-drawn card, a red heart, stick figures running, and 3 words written in crayon. "Don't give up." It was signed, Sophie. He held it for a long time, staring at the curves of her handwriting. That car did something no donation ever could. It hardened his resolve into something unbreakable. He pinned it to the wall above his bed. The days that followed were a storm of movement, recovery, soreness, and repetition. Every step was both agony and triumph. But Ethan had long passed the point where pain was a deterrent. It had become part of the process, part of the price. And for the first time in years, he wasn't paying it for himself. The donations passed $180,000. Then 200. People from all over the world were now following his journey. Mothers sharing their children's stories, veterans comparing notes on recovery, children sending videos of encouragement. Ethan watched none of them. He only watched the timer. The countdown to the Chicago Marathon, now 3 weeks away. He wasn't ready. Not yet. But he would be. He had to be. Because hope wasn't a concept anymore. It was a commitment. One built step by grueling step, mile by agonizing mile. The morning of the marathon broke cold and gray, with a low, windless silence that hung over Chicago like a hell breath. Ethan had barely slept. He had lain awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of his small temporary apartment just blocks from the starting line, his mind moving between fragments of past and future. He had imagined this day 1,000 times, rehearsed the pain, the doubt, the crowd. But now that it was here, nothing felt rehearsed. It was raw. It was terrifying. And yet, it was exactly where he was meant to be. The city stirred slowly. Streets filled with volunteers. Barricades snapped into place. Spectators with signs, water bottles, and thermoses of coffee lined the sidewalks. Runners of every kind, elite athletes, hobbyists, charity teams, gathered in waves, warming up, stretching, some laughing nervously, others dead silent. Ethan arrived in a van driven by one of the rehab volunteers, his braces already strapped in place. His walking poles lay beside him. As he was helped down to the street, he saw the signs. Hundreds of them. Run for Sophie. Ethan equals strength. Steps for hope. And there, right near the front, stood Sophie herself. She was smaller than he'd imagined. Thin, pale, her dark hair tied back in a ponytail. A knit cap pulled low over her ears. Her jacket was 2 sizes too big, and her hands clutched a poster with childlike lettering. Run for me, Ethan. When she saw him, she smiled shyly, nervously, and waved. Next to her stood Dr. Hill, his eyes glassy, his face drawn with a mixture of pride and helplessness. He gave Ethan a single, firm nod. Ethan didn't speak. He simply stepped forward, slowly, with the support of his walking poles and the quiet rhythm of his braces locking and unlocking. Every movement was deliberate, every inch earned. Around him, runners paused to watch. Conversations halted. The crowd leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. And then, like a wave cresting, applause erupted, not loud, not wild, but sustained and rising, as if the city itself understood the gravity of what was about to begin. At the starting line, Ethan stood shoulder to shoulder with thousands of runners, but he felt entirely alone. The national anthem played. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. A countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And they were off. The crowd surged forward, a sea of color and motion. Ethan moved last. One step, then another. The braces clicked with every shift of weight. His arms bore most of the load, his shoulders tightening, but he kept his head high. The city stretched ahead of him like a gauntlet. 26.2 miles of asphalt, bridges, and emotion. He knew he wouldn't finish with the pack. He wasn't here for time. He was here for truth. The first 2 miles were manageable. Adrenaline masked the discomfort. The cheering crowd along Michigan Avenue, the chorus of cowbells and encouragements gave him a rhythm. Volunteers offered water. Children shouted his name. Go, Ethan, they screamed. He smiled when he could, focused on breathing, focused on the road. By mile 4, the pain began to surface. Not sudden, but creeping. A tightening in his calves, a pinch in his lower back, the beginnings of a tremor in his arms. Maya, who flanked him as part of the official support team, watched closely but said little. She knew his threshold. She had seen him go further in training. But the cold air added a new layer of difficulty. Muscles responded slower. Joints stiffened. Ethan gritted his teeth and pressed forward. At mile 7, his right leg brace faltered. A misstep sent him stumbling to one knee. The crowd gasped. Volunteers rushed toward him, but he waved them off. Maya crouched beside him, hands steady. "You good?" she asked. He nodded once, then used the pole to push himself up. The silence turned into cheers again. Louder this time, fiercer, as if the stumble had only added to the legend. By mile 10, the field had long passed him. The streets were mostly cleared of runners now, but the spectators stayed. They lined the sidewalks, bundled in coats and scarves, refusing to leave. Some walked alongside the barriers just to keep pace with him. Others chanted his name. He stopped looking at signs, stopped registering faces. The world narrowed to the street in front of him, and the screaming ached in every part of his body. Then, somewhere around mile 12, he saw her again. Sophie, not in the crowd this time. She'd been wheeled forward by her uncle to meet him along the route. When Ethan saw her, cheeks pink from the wind, eyes wide, arms lifted in a wave, he slowed, dropped to one knee again, not from failure but from choice, and reached out a hand. She took it, her tiny fingers wrapping around his. "Keep going," she whispered. He nodded and rose. Mile 15 was a blur of pain. His arms were shaking with every step. Sweat chilled his spine. His lips were cracked from the wind. Maya handed him water, adjusted the straps on his braces. A medic checked his vitals. Heart rate high, but steady, still safe, still possible. At mile 17, the city felt colder, lonelier. The sun had started to set, casting long shadows across the road. Spectators had thinned. The city had moved on, but Ethan hadn't. He reached the final stretch of Lakeshore Drive just after nightfall. The skyline shimmered in the distance, and the finish line was lit with floodlights and digital timers. He wasn't sure how much time had passed. Hours. His body had long since moved beyond the capacity for normal pain. Now he was simply operating on will. One foot, then another. Then a voice rose from the dark. "Ethan." He turned his head and saw Dr. Hill, no coat, no clipboard, just a man in a gray sweater, walking toward him through the crowd, eyes wet, hands trembling. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough. For the first time in this long journey, Ethan felt like someone was walking with him. Not beside him, not behind him, but with him. The final mile felt infinite, but he crossed it, slowly, in silence. As he approached the finish line, a crowd had gathered again. News crews, nurses, fellow runners who had long since finished, but returned to see it happen. And at the front, holding a banner with a single word, "Hope," stood Sophie. Ethan crossed the line at just over 6 hours and 30 minutes. His legs gave out the moment he passed the finish marker, and he collapsed into a kneel, sobbing, not from pain, not from exhaustion, but from everything, the weight of the promise, the truth of redemption. Dr. Hill was there before anyone else. He dropped beside Ethan, wrapped both arms around him, and for the first time since the accident, neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. They stayed there on the cold asphalt just beyond the finish line. For what felt like minutes, but might have been only seconds, Ethan on his knees, shaking, tears streaming down his face, and Dr. Hill kneeling beside him, arms wrapped tight, holding him like a man holds something he almost lost. Around them, the crowd grew quiet. Even the flashing cameras and low murmurs faded into a kind of reverent silence, as if the city itself had taken a step back to allow this moment the space it deserved. Neither man spoke. There were no congratulations, no speeches. Just the grip of one human being clinging to another in gratitude, in disbelief, in something deeper than words. When Ethan finally found the strength to breathe again, it came in a shudder. His muscles throbbed. His joints screamed. But inside him, something was still, not empty, not broken, just quiet, as though a storm had finally passed. Dr. Hill helped him up slowly, guiding him with a care that was far from clinical. There was no trace of the cold, impersonal surgeon who had once delivered a life-altering diagnosis without emotion. That man was gone. In his place stood a father who had been cracked open by something he couldn't explain. They walked together, Ethan leaning into him, every step an echo of everything they'd been through separately and together. At the recovery tent, Sophie waited, bundled in a thick scarf, her cheeks pink from the chill. She saw Ethan and broke into a run, her arms wide. Ethan braced himself as she wrapped him in the fiercest hug her small body could manage. For a brief second, he forgot the pain, forgot the brace, forgot everything but that feeling, a child's warmth, unfiltered and real. "You did it," she whispered into his chest. "You really did it." He rested his chin on her head, his voice barely a whisper. "No, we did." Later that night, back in his apartment, Ethan sat alone by the window, watching the snow begin to fall. The silence in the room was different now. Not heavy, not suffocating, just peaceful. Outside, Chicago glowed under the first dusting of white, the streets still buzzing from the marathon. He looked down at his legs, bruised and sore beneath the brace, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't see what was missing. He saw what had been rebuilt. His phone vibrated on the table beside him. A text from Maya. Surgery scheduled. Hospital confirmed for next week. Final total raised. $412,000. You did more than enough. Ethan exhaled, a slow, steady breath that carried months of tension out with it. Sophie would get her surgery. The goal had been met, and then some. People had donated from every state, from Europe, from parts of Asia. He had been called a hero by journalists, a miracle by strangers. But none of that mattered to him now. The next morning, Dr. Hill visited him for the first time without pretense, without a stethoscope or notes. Just himself. He sat on the couch across from Ethan and held a cup of black coffee, like it was an anchor. "She goes in Tuesday," he said. "They'll do the bypass and valve correction. It's risky, but the surgeon says her chances are good now. Better than before. Thanks to you." Ethan nodded. "She's strong." "She is," Dr. Hill agreed, then paused. "So are you." The silence stretched again, but not uncomfortably. It felt necessary, like the kind of silence that precedes truth. "I want you to know," the doctor said finally, voice thickening, "that I was wrong. About you, about limits, about people. That day in the hospital, when I told you you'd never walk again, I believed it. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I thought I was preparing you." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "But I wasn't just talking to you," Dr. Hill continued. "I was talking to myself. I'd seen too much, lost too many. I forgot what hope looked like, until you reminded me." Ethan didn't reply. He didn't need to. The healing had already begun, not with surgery, not with therapy, but with presence, with honesty, with two men finally understanding what it meant to be broken and still capable of giving. Sophie's surgery happened the following week. It was long, complicated. Ethan waited in the hospital lobby for hours, his hands folded tightly in his lap, his body still recovering from a marathon. Maya joined him. So did a few of the physical therapists. Even a nurse from the old rehab center stopped by. When Dr. Hill emerged, his face pale and damp with sweat, Ethan stood without thinking. "She's okay," the doctor said, voice trembling. "She made it." A collective exhale swept the room. When Ethan finally saw Sophie again, she was groggy but smiling, her voice raspy from the anesthesia. "Did I miss the race?" she joked. "You were the race," Ethan replied. "You were the reason we all ran." News of the surgery's success spread quickly. More media attention followed, but Ethan declined interviews. He turned down offers for book deals, documentaries, speaking gigs. He wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. The only legacy he cared about was the one that lived quietly in Sophie's recovering heart and in the hearts of those who'd watched him rise when he had every reason to stay down. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring. Ethan continued physical therapy, not to chase records, but to maintain strength. He began visiting schools and community centers, not to tell his story, but to listen, to meet others learning to walk again, in body, in mind, in spirit. He never stopped running, not literally, but in purpose. He organized charity runs under a new banner, Miles for Others. The first event raised money for another child's surgery, then another. He never asked for recognition. He just showed up, quiet, determined, relentless. Sophie sent him drawings, letters, photos. As her strength returned, she visited him more often. They walked the lakefront together, her heart repaired, his steps still slow but full of power. They rarely talked about the past. They didn't have to, because something invisible had healed in both of them, not just bones or organs, but something deeper, something that reminded them both that sometimes, when we fight to save someone else, we unknowingly rescue the pieces of ourselves we thought were lost forever.